Okay, so hopefully that will help a bit as well. We have a Google Mesh network here in a 100 megabit connection, and I prioritize these devices for the next 4 hours. So I've literally done everything I possibly can. So let's cut to it. I think with the hour and a half, what we're meant to do, quite candidly, you can do well without me. Um, but we're meant to discuss about keeping students connected, which I interpreted to mean engaged, in touch, if you will, in an online course setting. Thank you, Angie. That's great news. Um, Apparently, I'm coming a little bit more clearly. So that's wonderful. Let's hope it continues. And so I put some things together recently that I'm prepared to share, but I'm much, much more interested if we can. And I realize many of you are probably trying to go ahead and have lunch. So let me set a few kind of ground rules that I think will be helpful. If you need to step out or want to, please feel free to do that. Don't feel as though you need to connect with the interests of my feelings or anyone else's for that matter. I do know that it's a long break, so come and go as needed. The second ground rule I'd like to share is that I would invite you all to speak up as much and as often as you'd like. If you're more comfortable on the chat, feel free to make your contributions there. I'm watching it closely. If you want to turn on your microphone, I think that would be also quite fine with me. I'm not a hold your questions until the end kind of conversationalist or presenter. And I don't look at this as a presentation. And I think this really threads together two together. Really would, just to say again, like this to be a discussion. And to sort of get that ball rolling, I'd like to throw a question to the group. And it's a very simple, open-ended kind of question, but what do we mean when we say student connectedness in online? Who would like to take a first stab at that question? What do we mean when we say student connectedness online? I'm sorry to hear it, Sue. I've done all there is to do at this point. And I think I would defer to you. I really don't want folks to have a poor experience on top of trying to squeeze in lunch before they get to the afternoon sessions. If you think it would be best to postpone, um, to possibly even cancel the session, no harm, no foul. The things we cannot control.
And I am going to defer to Tracy. So, Tracy.
Your audio seems to be improving over time. I don't know if you just edited the permissions for your internet, but it seems to be getting better.
Well, I'd set the priority about a half hour ago to make sure I would be getting it, but we're in a neighborhood where it's Charter Spectrum service, and I think 42 homes here in the subdivision, probably 38 homes with people attempting to work from home. We'll give Angie a moment to defer to Tracy.
I was just thinking it's strange watching and hearing, because someone just put in the chat that they could hear Jeremy just fine, but not the others. And I'm having the opposite issue. I can hear some of the others, but Jeremy is choppy for me. And
it's interesting, Tracy, because I'm having a hard time hearing you. I've heard everyone else. When Jonathan has spoken up, he's come through quite clearly. Well, let's keep this rolling for a bit. And if it gets to be too frustrating, if things are too choppy, I certainly will not take it to heart, Angie and Tracy, if you decide to pull the plug, or if individuals decide to sign off and possibly just grab their lunch. But let's go back, and I will share a bit about what I think we mean when we talk about student connectedness. I mean, the first and foremost thing I will say is that I like to ask a follow-up question to that, and that is, what does it look like in an online setting? Because I think we know what it looks like in a classroom. You know, the students are conscious, we're getting eye contact, hope they've shown up on time, they appear prepared, they're um, ready to engage. They're ready for the learning. There's hopefully a degree of enthusiasm or attentiveness. You can see where I'm sort of going with this. Large sphere of how we determine connectedness or engagement in classrooms is relying on a number of nonverbals. Nonverbals that will be absent or more difficult to come by when our students are studying with us remotely. So what that starts to look like has to be decidedly different, and what it calls from us to establish, to maintain, to gauge along the way, likewise, is variable. Tracy, are you thinking that perhaps I should be using the chat as well instead of even attempting the audio? It'll be like old school online teaching. When I first started at Central, we had only a text-based chat environment that everyone used for their synchronous instruction. I will keep talking then. We rely on our nonverbals in our classrooms, as Angie summarized, nonverbals that won't be readily apparent teaching online. So pivoting from that, I think it can be helpful to think of that instruction maybe in 2 or 3 separate phases. There are things that we really ought to be doing before our class even technically begins. So when possible, before the first day of a given semester or term. Then I think there are other things that are better suited, obviously, to occurring during the span of the class. And when I say class, I really don't mean a single meeting. We will drill down to some things that I think are applicable to single class meetings or sessions or activities. When I say class, for now at least, I really mean from start to finish. And if there is a third phase, I think this is where we acknowledge the realities of most of our classroom teaching experiences, where we create some closure, and in many cases we have some degree of ongoing contact with at least a subset of our students. And teaching online does not have to disrupt that. Whether it's the occasional request for a reference letter or something more ongoing, maybe you're actively mentoring students or have some advising responsibility in an otherwise research teaching role. And so I think those 3 phases really set a framework for how I want to continue our discussion. So thinking of the first, when we say student connectedness and we think of that online, we want to be preparing before the course even begins. And if there are ways, and a lot of articles tend to agree on this first piece, I don't think it will come as any particular shock to any of you. In fact, some of the stuff I've looked at very recently, it's like the internet is awash in advice now on these topics. But a piece from Top Class, which really is geared more toward, I think, corporate learning, even has this advice, and that is to prepare the learner in advance. So if there's any sort of way, and that preparation is twofold. Preparation obviously has the technological aspect to it, but it also has the expectation or practice-based aspect to it. And specifically, we want the students to be comfortable, to be aware of the tools that they are going to be using. And so the pre-class responsibility then falls on us to make some decisions and to stick with them to the extent that they continue to make sense. So what do I mean by that? In my doctoral program, when I was a student, it was an online program. And we were using an online annotation tool for the first several weeks of the semester that vanished. It was a privately held, small-scale tool. It was really, really neat. I wish I could remember the name of it. And it went away. The guys who were maintaining it, probably out of a basement office or a garage, pulled the plug. And so obviously it wasn't possible to continue with that tool. But stability is an important component, I think, to succeeding in instructional settings, online and otherwise. You settle on a set of tools, probably your institution's LMS, perhaps a video conferencing environment like Zoom, WebEx, Teams, Google Duo, whatever it might be. you settle on the technologies, and hopefully your institution or the web in some respect has some how-to things, some pre-orientation things that you can, use this word deliberately, arm your students with. Make sure they have a chance to get ready for the online learning experience. And a crucial caveat to this is that they get ready for it in a no stakes fashion. Their grade's not hanging in the balance yet. Quiz score, paper grade, participation points, none of it. Maybe you want to incentivize it, throw some extra credit at them for completing the pre-course orientation, the LMS workshop, or whatever it may be. Then there's that second component. And this, I think, pulls in all sorts of stuff we heard yesterday about syllabi design and course communications, the approach that Tracy outlined in the 3S session. I think it was 3 S's. You really want to put in what they can expect from you in terms of turnaround time and the ways that they can reach you and how quickly you'll respond. That's much more practice or methodology based. And so those are the things I would set out as pre-class. What other kinds of things do you all find yourselves doing to set things up before class even begins? Oh, we've got an item. I'm going to read Gail's comment here in the chat. Interesting. You know, even if you insist on cameras being on, I think you still get some pushback. You know, it can be distracting. And I think too, I started to feel some fatigue, some marked fatigue a few weeks into working remote. And I started to wonder why I felt differently tired from my online interactions. And so I dug in and did some reading, and it basically, fundamentally, it's about cognitive load. It's not possible really for our minds to look at a grid of 35 people concurrently and really interpret what we're seeing. And so those kinds of meetings, very simply put, exhaust us faster or in a different way, looking out on a room full of maybe twice as many, 3 times as many people who are physically present. I do think if a student is giving a presentation, if she's leading a part of the class, it's probably a reasonable requirement to have cameras on. But the other thing I've come to terms with is when students were displaced, especially in a lot of institutions this last semester, they didn't all return to pleasant circumstances. Right? They may not be sitting somewhere where they want to turn their camera on. We just don't know. They may be the student who has to attend class from a Wi-Fi parking lot. They may live in less than ideal housing, have other challenging circumstances at home. So I think it's an individual decision, just come back round on it. I think it depends. And I also think, to Catherine's point, she's absolutely right. Technology can really be a factor. We might ask for it, but if the bandwidth isn't there, or if you have students on a data plan propping up a smartphone as a hotspot, we might literally be introducing new economic burdens on them by banning certain kinds of things. So I don't know if anybody else, excellent questions, great discussion. What an awesome group. Angie, so the cognitive load fatigue, agreed that makes a difference. Thank you, Kelly. So continuing on, we've done some preparation. We've identified our tool sets. We've been transparent in our syllabus. What other kinds of things before class I like to give, and there's some research that supports this, although it tends to be high-performing students anyway. But if you can give students early entree to the online materials, to the LMS, that's a good idea. Beginning to communicate with students, again, in a low stakes way before the course even officially begins. It can really help. I think in the absence of nonverbals, we can backfill some of those kinds of things when it comes to exchanging enough correspondence with one another. And I'm going to tell a story, if that's all right, as we get to the point of talking about during class. One of the early roles I had at CMU, so this was in the late 90s, Central Michigan University was one of the first 3 institutions in the country to put a Doctor of Audiology program online. And even though these are not the earliest years of online instruction, these still were the years of LMS infancy. Interactions like this and Zoom to like platform are generally relegated to chat only. And so we were building out this program, and I don't know if the subtext is of interest, but what had changed in the audiology field is you suddenly, the regulating bodies were mandating gradually that practitioners needed to be doctors. Having an MS was no longer adequate to license and practice. So you had hundreds, maybe even thousands of people around the country who had three choices: go into a different field, retire, or get a doctorate within a certain period of time. So there was a temporary market, and CMU graduated somewhere between 300 and 500 AUDs through our online program. And we still have a campus program as well. But be that as it may, the reason I'm sharing this story is that about a year into the program, we had around 50, two cohorts of about 25 individuals who had never seen each other in person. They were scattered all over the country. I think we even had a couple of Canadian students in that original group, which that grew to where it was an international program. And we, CMU, put together a reception at the American Academy of Audiology conference. And so that evening reception, a colleague and I stood at the door because we'd never seen any of these individuals face to face. And this is not a story about science or research. It's a personal experience that stayed with me for the better part of 20 years. As the students started arriving and filtering into the room with the faculty, with my colleagues and I, many of them began to play this sort of guessing game with us at the doorway, pointing out, oh, I bet that's Jean, I bet that's Chris. And more often than not, they were right. And maybe they'd seen, little JPEGs of each other or something like that. But it was fascinating how well they knew each other already, how they could perceive mannerisms in that reception, in that banquet hall, that were somehow demonstrated in a text-only environment, that were manifesting in a chat room, that were manifesting on discussion posts. So I think that this is maybe where I should have begun the lunch conversation. It's probably most important to get in our own minds that rapport, community, deep social connection, meaningful connection, it is all possible in settings like this. If it weren't, we wouldn't have things like Match.com. So if you could still see me and I had a mic to drop, maybe I would drop it. But I think most of us are in that camp already. We've seen at least glimpses of it. But it leaves a lot of, well, how do I do that? What does it look like? And Tracy said it would be all right if I did something that could be perceived a bit as self-promoting. I don't mean it that way, but a couple faculty and I at CMU published a piece. I think it was just last year. Yeah, January of 19. Time flies under these kinds of circumstances. And for someone who's looking for the nuts and bolts of a plan that just says, you know what, tell me what to communicate, how to communicate it, and when to communicate it to keep this connectedness going, I'd recommend our article. And I'm putting some things in the chat that will help you get your hands on it. It's quite literally a blueprint for adapting, well, not literally, figuratively, it's a blueprint for adapting a marketing strategy. So one of the colleagues that helped write it is a professor of hospitality and marketing, and it's adapting the marketing strategy known as touch points to a communications plan in an online course. And so if you're entirely anti-thinking of students as consumers or customers, this article might rub you the wrong way. But if you're in that space of thinking, how do I even do this? How often should I be writing? What other kinds of things are there to send to students beyond weekly announcements? This could be a great thing to check out. So what do we have so far? We've got a clear syllabus that explains our response times, the ways to reach us. We've got our tech set identified. We've encouraged students to familiarize themselves with those things. We're beginning to plan the cadence of our own communications. I think the next things to do are making sure you have purpose, whether you're going to state it in your communication or establish it in advance within the LS or both, but that you've brought meaning. You've created a why for the things you're asking the students to do. And I'm going to use sort of a darker example. The chair of a department here at CMU reached out last night. They've discovered some breaches in some examinations. Some whole exams were found on Chegg.com. I don't think any of us is particularly shocked by that. But they've discovered some blatant cheating that went on during this remote semester. Not a bunch of cases, just a couple really, but still rather alarming. And he was seeking some advice, some next steps. And I took the opportunity to remind him that most of the research on this, in part, points to students beginning to cut corners or cheat. I don't use that word all that often, when they don't see purpose, when they don't perceive the value of something. And, let's be honest, most of us have these threshold concepts that they have to be understood well before a student can progress through our disciplines. And they may not fully get up front why they have to learn or go through what feels like drudgery. That's our job, to establish the importance, the relevance, to tell them why we're doing what we're doing. And to that end, where all of our language is about SLOs, student learning outcomes and learning objectives and what the other grander terminology we use, I'm fond of saying in line in my announcements or in my course materials why we are doing what we're doing, and then I explain value of it, and I think that's something that we need to be planning to do and need to be proactive about. So in terms of circling back to the cadence of communication, I think there are layers to consider here, and again, this is where the Blueprints article might be of some help. But you want to, I'll take a half step back. We all benefit a great deal from the parameters that are often set for us when we teach in a classroom. And it's something that I personally not stopped to think a lot about, except in the moments where I've had some staff colleagues make offhanded kinds of remarks about, oh, the faculty. And I'll say, hold on just a second, because as staff, we're essentially told to be here Monday, Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can eat for about an hour in the middle of the day if you'd like. Whereas the faculty life, on the one hand, maybe there's a degree of greater autonomy, but on the other, it's this adjustment to what can be a widely differing schedule every 16 weeks. But even within that, again, you have these set times on set days in set places where you will have the opportunity to interact directly with your students. And that can largely be absent online. We have to bring that structure back to the extent that it's valuable. So I'm getting a notice that my connection is unstable again. I'm going to wait just a moment, see if it recovers. All right, let's see how this goes. We have to bring some of that structure back to the extent that it's valuable. And so what I mean by that is I would generally advise against, excuse me, simply recreating my course schedule online. I do have colleagues who did that if they were teaching XYZ 300 and it was typically meeting Tuesdays and Thursdays for an hour and a half each, they went 100% into a setting like we're all in now, and they broadcast those days from those times and continue teaching and essentially as close to exactly the way they were as they could. That probably was out of necessity during a semester that was disrupted, but it is not well advised in full when you have time to plan, when you've got time to reconceive what the experience will be like. However, one of the values of having that ongoing regular meeting is that chance to interact with your students. So recreating some of that probably needs to take the form of at least a weekly update that goes out in the form of an announcement, that goes out as an email. If you've identified and are using another application like Remind or you've set up a Twitter hashtag, some other kind of mechanism, but a regular communication that your students can come to expect every Sunday, every Monday, whatever it is. I think too, this is a side note, but reimagining what a week is when it comes to online instruction. I encounter faculty all the time, everything is due on Sunday night. And then you realize people don't fully grasp when midnight is. When 12 o'clock is actually the first moment of the next day, not the last moment of the previous day. And we do some quirky things when we move online. I've seen it hundreds of times, seeing things due at midnight when they're not due at midnight usually. Choose a time that makes sense to people, just timing that gives you time to assess whether things are coming in, that will give you time as the instructor to manage when things are arriving. You know, I'm not villainizing Sunday night due dates, but they were terrible for me. They were terrible for my students. And that's 15 years of online teaching behind this mission. I moved my deadlines to Friday night. And my students, I thought if they could have come to my door with torches and pitchforks, they would have. But I was going to disrupt two of trends I was seeing. And this will get into my next point as well. If you're wondering if I'm going to make any more points, I do have a few more. And certainly keep your comments coming in the chat. If anything I'm saying sparks a question or a chance to turn your microphone on. I said I wanted this to be a discussion, and I do, very much so. So please, if you've got thoughts, I would love them, and I'm sure others would welcome a chance to hear anyone else's voice in addition to my own. Back on that kind of a point, the LMS can tell you some things about whether students are logging in regularly. Of course, you can see if they're turning in work. You can see the timings of when they're submitting things, leading things, and looking across the activity in my own course sites overall. I was seeing this massive crescendo where basically the course was born untouched Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, even Friday into Saturday morning sometimes. And I see this influx of peaking in the moments, the hours, just before the deadline. And I had a correspondence of email. There's the kinds of emails I hope for instructors about the nuances of content or where can I get more information about this, the kinds of communication that have shared passion for art or discipline, whatever it may be. But no, they were the kinds of questions, where do they find this? Can I have another day? Questions that immediately betray the fact that the student had done nothing all week long. And so I was looking to do that. Within two troubling trends I referenced earlier, students waiting until last day and creating a lot of urgency themselves. And the second thing, my internet connection is indicated as unstable. I'm going to give it a moment. All right, let's keep going and see. I did address questions to paraphrase and to summarize. I have to be careful about mandating cameras be turned on for technological reasons, reasons. But I did concede that if a student is supposed to present, she's leading the class at time, giving her the advance warning that one of the expectations is appearing on camera. Even I would add the caveat, we're evaluating. If we're evaluating the presentation, if it's a communications course, that might make it absolutely necessary that a presenter be visible. The idea that we need everyone's camera on, it doesn't resonate with me. I can see where it would be desirable for some. I would call it just in general. I'm sorry, so it's My connection's reporting that it's fine now. Maybe the recording will give some clear playback if it's distributed. I do apologize. I've not had any connectivity issues at all since we're from home. This is the first, of course, and now. So with that day, the elements, I made the decision to move the deadline today for the major projects. I think Angie comments and phrases out a bit too. You really do have the luxury of separating due date, separating due dates from the meetings of traditional class. These are advantageous kinds of things that can be done. I encourage people to think through. And I think that, again, has bridged me to this next piece of keeping students connected during class, is thinking in terms of smaller chunks, of giving them progress benchmarks, if you will. So instead of a discussion that they need to take part in this week, setting it up instead so that they need to make their first contribution by Tuesday, and they need to respond to their classmates by Thursday. To respond, classmates responded to them by Saturday. It's a pedestrian example, so much more to designing a good discussion, just that. It is a good start, I think. Very good start to make sure that they have a regular reason to sign in. They're doing their work, they're doing things along the way. I think that you can build up a very robust discussion. Because another one of the affordances or advantages, if you will, online automatically create more connectedness is establishing roles that rotate. One of the greatest experiences I had as a doctoral student was in our motivation course. And the professor did something that I had been, a student. I had been in college for close to 20 years on and off at this point. I'd never really experienced done well. He had defined roles for each member of the team, and through each activity, our roles rotated so that each person had a certain level of ownership and responsibilities. And I think that can be tremendously advantageous. But I want to go back now. We've talked a little bit more about what the students would be doing and what kinds of requirements you can put on them. But we've talked only on what we're doing to create instructor to student connectedness. We focused on pre-class kinds of things, and we started to talk about during class kinds of things. Yeah, you do remind me, Kelly, your comment about this possibly affecting everyone. My team's software crashed repeatedly for about 2 hours straight this morning, even though I wasn't having any other kinds of issues with my machine or internet connection at the time. So I do wonder if there's something larger scale that is impacting pieces of the cloud, let's say. Well, so what other kinds of things are we doing then? I think we have to maintain connectedness, to create the kind of community we want, we need to be socially present. And whether you accept the idea that learning is a social activity or not, this idea of creating immediacy and being socially present in your online teaching will help create a kind of environment that leads to student connectedness. Within that scope, though, there really are a series of personal decisions or preferences to consider. Because each of us is in total control of how much of ourselves we want to share. I have colleagues who are Facebook friends with all of their students, even as class is going on. But looking at their Facebook persona, sometimes they have more than one. They use for the purpose I described. They have a more personal social media presence. That is too much for me. So I have a few past I'm connected to on social media because careers and their paths after working with made sense for us to stay connected. But stepping back from that, the avatar you use, the photographs of yourself you might share with students, personal information, you have to find the level you're comfortable with. but then make the best of that. What you're willing to share with them about yourself. And if you start to think about the kinds of stories you might tell over the duration of a semester in the classroom, it's getting that same level of yourself in front of the students so that they connect with you as a person, not a presence. Rather than an email address, you're more than comments on their page. And some of your communication should address that need as well. I think being responsive is a very closely related piece to that. You say, oh, I don't want to be connected to my computer or my phone 24 hours a day, 5 or 7 days a week. I would advise you against that. I touched briefly in the Q&A session yesterday on an anecdote professor during the remote semester who said he was answering email 18 hours a day. That's not for anyone. And so what I'm really driving at is within this notion of keeping students connected, you be transparent with them in your syllabus, so it's a pre-class step, and during the class about how quickly things will happen, when the things will happen, what they will see or receive to know those things happen. So what am I referring to? Now, specifically, when a grade will be returned, when feedback will be available on a discussion, when they'll hear from you again if you be unavailable, which hours, you might have in that you're available 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and you check email on weekends between noon and 2. That may be all that you do, that more than you want to do. The key is the transparency. Certainly there's some need to align it, sure, with institutional guidelines, depending on your role and the requirements on you at your school. The transparency is the key. A student who can see, my professor responds within 24 hours, Monday through Friday, but an email sent on Saturday won't be responded to until Monday. They can then manage their expectations. You lower their anxiety level, you increase your positive sense toward you. So it's not about being connected 24 hours a day. It's about being connected when you say you will be, responding as quickly as you've suggested. And candidly, owning it when the ball gets dropped. Well, that's interesting. Our session's working better for Kelly over her 4G network than it is if you're watching the chat. It's owning it too when things go awry. So what do I mean by that? In one of the first courses I taught online at the grad level, traveling for months, and I took for granted that I would have pretty solid connectivity end to end, the airport to the hotel to the conference floor. And I turned out to be sort of wrong about that. The hotel, which was modern in just about every other way, was still charging for reliable daily internet connectivity. And I didn't want to pay. And I ended up having to kind of backpedal with my students and get an email out of the conference that just said, look, I'm not going to be connected as much as I would like. I'm only going to be able to get back to you in the evenings. And they managed that because I was able to communicate it. And I think that's something that's worth establishing and invoking as needed from the syllabus and then throughout the class are contingency plans. So, and loss of connectivity. What are you going to tell them up front if you're going to be away for a weekend or you have a conference? And then unplanned losses of connectivity. So teaching that I've done over the years, it was during the H1N outbreak where I finally turned the corner on this and had established policies so that my students knew, based on the syllabus and my own reminders, exactly what they could do if classes were canceled. The most common reason, I think, for us that are Michiganders at least, are snow days, those kinds of things. But having that contingency, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a rather unfounded claim, but the gaps when they occur online now are magnified versus a single class being canceled. If you tail and can't hold class on a Wednesday, let's say, when students arrive, they see the typical sign on the door, or they've received an email. The concern level, the magnitude of that is somehow more modest is if one of us goes MIA in the online environment. And I hope that resonates. Again, that's a less founded claim than the others I've shared with you to this point. I've got some other kinds of things that are much more geared, again, as the course is running, and it's more practical advice. So I feel like we've had this kind of not exactly lofty, but very general discussion, and I'd like to boil down into several reminders of things that I think are very helpful in maintaining connectedness, keep the learning community rolling along, but simultaneously, and a bit of hyperbole here, not ruining your lives in the process. I mean, I've heard online teaching described as like the ocean. You can't turn your back on it. I agree. I think if keep that metaphor going, if you turn to the ocean in advance and say, I'm going to need to turn my back on you this weekend, the ocean can deal with that. If instead you simply turn your back with no notice, that ocean might just swallow you up. So what are some practical things that you might not find in the blueprint article, but are some other kinds of things I would suggest? So we've touched on leveraging what's inside the LMS in terms of student performance data, but think in terms of some other kinds of things. So this is about efficiency. A lot of systems will let you take multiple sections of the same or even different courses and either put them all together or create a separate instance where they're all together and they continue to remain separate. So why would I want that? For the efficiency's sake, so that message being communicated to one section of, let's say, introduction to psychology students can be sent at the same instant with additional effort to all sections of your psychology introduction to psych students. There are modules that can be added to certain LMSs. I think one popular one is called Quickly that can add that functionality even in the absence of a combined site or a merged site. Anytime you can send something once and reach a larger audience instead of sending it more than once, you should leverage that, in my opinion. It doesn't devalue the connectedness. It just saves you some time. Similarly, as students write to you personally, and I love this because it happens. And what it reminds me of, and hopefully this has happened for most, if not all of us, you're nearing the end of the class period, let's say, back in a classroom. So imagine yourself back in a classroom, and it's the last 10 minutes of class, the last 5 minutes, or perhaps just before the break. And you look out at that room and you say, are there any questions? Is there anything I can clarify for anyone before we head to break or before we wrap up? And usually, there are very few questions. There might be a couple. The student who always has a question, the student who wants me to know that he or she is still there. There's a couple, but what happens when we actually go to break or we actually wrap up? Does somebody want to guess in the chat? You know, because it happens to all of us. I really hope someone would jump on this and take a guess. In a setting like this, it's really important time for people to type too. And Angie, you've been doing an awesome job keeping it going. Yes, Pamela, I love that's part of that cadence of communication that you get every Sunday night. And they know not only what expected on Sunday night, but they know what will be in it, where you're really laying out a reveal, love word, where you're laying out what they'll see and do that coming week. Brilliant. So what happens when you break or you wrap up class is inevitably a lineup of students who have questions, but questions they did not ask in front of the whole group. And in the physical classroom, still able to do those pretty quickly. If one or more of them is something that everyone really should have heard, the students come back and break and you'll tell everyone the answer to that question. in an online setting, that shifts. You sort of lose the ability to do that in exactly the same way. And I know I touched on this yesterday for those who may have been in the Q&A session, but when a student writes you privately and asks a question, the answer to which would benefit the whole class, take that opportunity to send the answer to the whole class. If you've got 3 or 4 questions come in, send a consolidated communication so that when you get to the 6th email asking you the same question, you can know 2 things: that you've already answered it for the whole class, and even that student has that answer. And second, you probably have some clarifying to do somewhere. And that's the other opportunity, I think, when so much of your teaching from or teaching with is tangible and it lives on a website somewhere on Canvas or Blackboard or D2L. When you get the same question about something more than once, it is probably an opportunity, a thin veil opportunity at that, to take a look at those directions, the formatting, the placement, the content. So why are students having to ask this? Is something absent or is it unclear? But the point is to thereby reduce the number of individual questions by taking that extra step of posting the response to the whole class. When you do that, it's a good idea not to personally identify the student who asked you the question, rather just be general in terms of a classmate had a great question, or a classmate asked me an important question, and all of you should have the answer in front of you. Just catching up on the chat. Angie, I should have just sent you notes. You're much more concise and clear than my rambly kind of conversation is. Other kinds of things is consider your students where they are in terms of this idea of connectedness. And so this might make the pieces in your syllabus a little more general. It might even disrupt this idea of pre-identifying the technology tool you use. But maybe you are entertaining the idea of a closed Facebook group for your course. Maybe you are entertaining the idea of a Twitter feed with a unique hashtag for your course. I'm not suggesting that you start putting out TikToks necessarily. And I've got a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and 8-year-old in the house. And TikTok was something about a clock did just a few weeks ago. I am suggesting that you think outside of the frame of, well, this is how I communicate. I send email. If there are easy ways, things you'd be comfortable with reaching your students. A couple of other kinds of things, and doing some of these things, right? Like emphasis on some, because you can come away from these discussions with far too much to do. You really have to settle on the 1 or 2 things that you think will make a difference in maintaining connectedness with your own learners. But as you do that, I would encourage everybody not to lose touch with the basics. I don't know about all of you, but I don't, in the rosters that I receive in my teaching, I don't get students' telephone numbers. I have their name, their class standing, and their global ID is what we call their username at Central, but the first chunk of their email address, that's it. But I do have an office, an administrative contact who can get me any student's phone number. I know at some institutions, faculty have direct access to those systems where you can look up a student phone number. If you notice as you're perusing homework submission dates, my connection is dirty again, so I'm sure I'm breaking up. I'm going to just pause for a moment. And assuming it's restored, I want to take a shout out to Pamela's comment in the chat. That's something I've personally done, and I think it's spectacular. If you're using an LMS that has, they all have threaded discussion, right? But if you're using one that has a subscription feature, you can make a cultural shift in your course where you set up a Q&A forum, and that's where the questions go. If a student has a question that isn't private, that isn't something she needs to direct only to you, they go to the forum. And in doing that, you've now made yourself third partners maybe who will help answer things. If you subscribe yourself, you can keep a bird's eye view of things, make sure they're steering one another in the right direction, and interject when you need to, when you add something more to conversation that's happening. I also encourage you to save all your written communications, whether it's in your email system, whether you're copying and pasting out to a document, whether you're able to maintain ongoing access to previously taught courses in your LMS. But I almost never start writing anything original anymore when I'm teaching in any setting. If I'm going to send a communication, I probably have the beginning of it in my repository, the first week's communication, the wrap-up communication. And so that's my last piece on the short list of more tangible practices. Save so that you can edit and reuse. There's no need to start with nothing with each and every email, with each and every announcement. Edit and reuse. The caution there, of course, is if you have messages that say, I hope you all enjoy a wonderful holiday break, and your course is ending in May, you're going to need to be careful to take the extra step to pick out a mention of Christmas or Independence Day or Hanukkah and correct it. Make sure you're keeping things current. But it's an amazing time saver. And that is true, too, of providing feedback. I was not always a fan of this, but if you have certain comments that tend to be made often for students, the grad students that I taught during the first half of the spring semester, it was the first course in their new program. Most of them had been out of school for at least 10, if not more years. And to say that they were a little rickety with APA is putting it mildly. And I was pointing out the same things again and again. So I created a feedback document that I could quickly copy and paste comments from over and over again. And so those are a handful of foundational kinds of things. If you've done a subset of those things throughout your course, this last leg of connectedness can come in as you start to think about closure and what it means to end a course online and how that might differ or not from ending a class in the classroom. But I think a few things can be useful. And some of these are supported in various research and others are just some ideas from experience. But in the same way as you would offer some sort of farewell to your students during the last class, you should do something similar online. There should be a final communication that's identified as such that tells them where and when they can expect to see their final grades. And I usually personally implement a 2-staged system on that. I give them a place in the LMS where they can see their tentative final grade, and I build in a 24 to 48 hour window where the expectation that's incumbent upon them is to check that grade. Take a look through everything. I'm only human. By this point in the semester, they are quite well aware that I'm only human, much like they are. And it gives them that chance to say, oh, wait a second, it looks like I got a 0 for this thing that you said you would accept via email, and I have it. Those kinds of things, or calculation errors. First semester I taught at the grad level in 2012. I had to fill out, we were still using physical change of grade cards. I had a calculation error in my grade book. I had to fill out 35 change of grade cards by hand. Those kinds of lessons stick with a person, I think. So in that communication, you tell them where and when. You'll then make those grades the true official final grades if you don't hear from them. If you're comfortable and you have a social media presence that is appropriate to connect with students on, maybe it's your LinkedIn, you could offer them that. If you have a policy about offering letters of recommendation, advice for future courses of study, this is the place to make those kinds of mentions. And if you've been doing some of the other kinds of things that we've talked about over the last hour along the way, this will be a very natural set of final steps, those communications. If your course is structured like many of those that I've taught, there's a flurry of activity toward the end. the communications leading up to this final one can be helpful with that flurry of activity, but it won't be something different. It will be the same thing that's been suggested to us along the way, that we'd still send out our Sunday night message, to use I don't know if it was Pamela, Sue, I apologize, but the person who shared that they do the Sunday night message, you'd still do that the Sunday of the last week. But there might be enough activity for some extra communications. And one of the things that the Blueprints article will encourage you to do are all the little things along the way. So if a student turns something in that's particularly great, you might write to her privately and let her know that this was great, or you saw improvement, or you wonder if you could save the paper and show it to a future class. Find reasons to contact the students individually. Generally speaking, make those reasons positive when you can. Yeah, excellent summary of that, Pamela. 24-hour chance for them to come forward saves you both a lot of trouble before those grades get in the permanent official system, at least at most schools. I think getting them changed after that is a little bit more challenging. Really didn't have too much else in terms of planned comments. I know that we've got, I believe, another 30 minutes left. If the internet will cooperate with us, I'd love to open it up and really just have more of a dialogue for the last 30 minutes, if you all are willing, or as an alternative, if our symposium leadership thinks it best to have a little bit longer break, we can certainly conclude. But with that said, I'm going to quiet down for a bit and see what else might be on your minds.
Hey, Jeremy, it's totally fine if you want to wrap up, because you had a really long break and I don't really expect you to have to talk that whole time. So people can take a break for half an hour. They can have conversations between themselves if they want to introduce, if you guys all want to introduce yourselves and your roles, it might be a good time to make connections and network. But there's no expectation for the next half hour, but we can leave this open for you guys to be able to use it however you'd like. If you need to step out and eat, feel free to do so, and we can all come back at 1 o'clock. Sounds like the internet's getting a little better. We'll see. I hope we will be what I want. So
you didn't break up at all for me, Kelly. I heard all of that, and what I will say then in conclusion is, it is a bummer that the internet didn't work perfectly for us in this session, because I even found some great Zoom backgrounds that I was looking forward to trying out with all of you. I had a beautiful photograph of Myrtle Beach, some things from campus here at Central. But again, that selfie that I'm using, that's about as good as I ever look. So that's fine for that to represent me. I want to say thank you to all of you. I hope that I've been told by many students over many years that, oh, great, quote, great instructor, but so monotone. So I appreciate you living through an hour of nothing, little more than my voice. Angie, Kelly, Pamela, Sue, anyone that puts things in the chat and summarized we went along, very much appreciated. And Kelly, to you and your crew and all the planners, just a big thank you. I think there's a need for what you've put together. This is only about the halfway point, so there's lots more great ahead. Yvonne, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the hour, and I hope you have one or two things that maybe will be added to your toolkit in terms of how you keep connected with your students, connect them to one another, content moving forward. So thank you again. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Enjoy your lunches.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate all your contributions and taking a few sessions. We really are grateful. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Hey, we'll see you guys back at 1.